Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast. I'm Chris Garner, here today to give my review on A Monster Calls, which is the 2016 fantasy drama film directed by J.A. Bayona, starring Lewis McDougall, Felicity Jones, Sigourney Weaver, Toby Kebbell, and with the voice talents of Liam Neeson. This has been a film I've been very interested in checking out, and one that I actually didn't do any kind of reactions to in terms of the trailers and the featurettes that came out. It really did kind of catch me by surprise. I believe I was at Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, where I first got the featurette of this film, which kind of laid down the history, the complicated history of the novel itself, and sort of how the film came together in terms of the visuals and the direction that they headed in. And just from that, I could tell that this film was going to be really something special, and it absolutely is. Technically, this is still a 2016 movie, as it was released in the latter part of last year. It was released on the 1st of January for us in the UK, and I believe it's released on the 6th or the 7th of January in the US, but this is one I absolutely wanted to talk about, because had this have come out last year and I have seen it last year, this would definitely have been in my top 5 films. It really would. And I know that this is kind of fresh as well, because I recently did my top 5 list from last year, and I'm really regretting that this has been released a little bit later, because this would definitely have made the cut. So the plot for this film, for anyone who hasn't seen the trailers, involves a boy called Connor, played by Lewis McDougall, who is trying to come to terms with and to cope with his mother, played by Felicity Jones' terminal illness. And he copes with this by creating this fantasy world and this fantasy character in the shape of a tree monster voiced by Liam Neeson, who through storytelling and through this close bond, this friendship between the tree and Connor, helps him come to terms with what he's about to face. So right from there, you can tell it's a very moving plot. Now, the first part of this review will be spoiler free. I'll move into spoilers later and I'll let you guys know when I do get to that. But really, you can tell what kind of movie this is going to be if you have seen the trailers and you know where the story is ultimately going to lead to and what the theme of the story is about. Nevertheless, it is a very beautiful movie, and there are some things in the movie that I don't want to spoil, so this first section will be spoiler free. So the history of the novel was a very interesting one. It was originally an idea created by Siobhan Dowd, who came up with like the first 1,000 words or so and the ultimate structure of the novel and the characters involved, but tragically passed away before she could write the whole thing. After that fact, Walker Books came to a guy called Patrick Ness, who approached him with the idea of completing this book and taking it from the notes that Siobhan had created and working it into a novel. So he absolutely did that. It's a book I haven't read, but now having seen the movie, I would love to read, especially with some of the imagery in this and the illustrations, which play a huge integral part in this movie. And obviously down the line now with this movie, J.A. Bayona, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, he's set to direct the upcoming Jurassic Park film, the sequel to Jurassic World, so I'm very much looking forward to that based on his direction in this one. He had a long conversation with Patrick Ness, and Patrick Ness also writes the screenplay for this movie, and they discussed ideas of how they could adapt it to the big screen. And one of the things that was brought about by J.A. was the inclusion of the illustrations, and I'll get to that later in terms of the visual design and the special effects itself, because they are absolutely flawless. And a big part of this movie as well is the acting. This is where the real emotion comes through in the film. I guess I'll start off with the main character of Connor in this movie, played by Lewis McDougall. He's an actor of which I haven't seen any of his previous work. I did check his filmography before this review, and I saw that he featured in the film Pan from last year, I believe, the one with Hugh Jackman, where he's decked up like Johnny Depp. It's a film I didn't see, I heard bad things about, so I'm not sure what Lewis's performance is like in this, but his performance in this movie is absolutely heartbreaking, and he really has to deal with so much in this film. That's inherently what the character has to, but in terms of all the different emotions and elements that he has to bring into this one role is incredible, especially for a kid of his age. And the fact that he also has to have interaction with this CGI character of the monster, voiced by Liam Neeson. I'd love to see some of the behind-the-scenes stuff in this, because there are moments where it does kind of feel like the treatment they did with Treebeard in Lord of the Rings, where, you know, you've got the initial puppet of the hand or maybe side of the head, or a close-up of the foot or something, but the bulk of it is CGI, so they've blended it incredibly well. And his acting against the monster, as well as on his own, he spends a lot of this movie on his own, because that's a quality of the character and that feeling of isolation that he feels throughout the movie that he has to deal with. That's part of his character, and he plays it absolutely phenomenally. And there's a moment towards the end where he really gets centre stage in a moment, and you really get to see that, just that outburst of emotion that's been pent up in his character since the beginning of the film. and you feel it. And it's, I would say, if you have a soul, it's impossible to not get teary-eyed at this movie. I mean, I was a complete and utter absolute mess. Everyone else in the audience seemed to be as well. It was actually a packed crowd, and you could tell that everyone was in the movie. Everyone was quiet. Everyone was wired into it. And as soon as those credits hit, everyone kind of remained seated for like 30 or 40 seconds or something. They were just completely enamored with the movie, and you could tell that they'd experienced, and everyone in that room had experienced something special with this movie, and that's all down to Lewis's performance. I don't know whether he's going to get any kind of award recognition. I'm really not sure, but I think he deserves some kind of award from this movie, and I think actually a lot of the actors in this movie do, and the film in general definitely does, but I'll get onto that later with what I think it should be nominated for. Another one of our main characters in this movie is the mother, played by Felicity Jones. Now, in the past, I've sort of gone on record and says that I've never really been a big fan of Felicity Jones as an actress. I found her very wooden. I haven't seen The Theory of Everything. I know that's one that a lot of people go back to and say she's phenomenal in. I'll reserve judgment for that until I see the movie. I'm sure she's great in it, but I haven't seen that. So before then, I'd only seen trailers for Rogue One at the time, which did have a lot of cringeworthy dialogue in from her and bad delivery, and I'd seen Inferno, which was the third Da Vinci Code movie, and I didn't think she was great in that either. Did see Rogue One and enjoyed her very much, but here, she really brings that drama, and how she looks, and I guess this is all down to the makeup, and I don't know if she lost weight, because she's a very slender woman herself, but I'm assuming she lost even more weight for this, and her performance is truly heartbreaking, playing the role of the mother who is having to instill that strength into her son when she has very little strength remaining with her terminal illness. She's trying to prepare her son for the inevitable of what's going to happen, trying to secure his future life to live with his grandmother because she's been long since separated from her husband. The husband's played by Toby Kebbell, who's also great in this movie. I don't think I've actually seen him in a movie as himself in live action. I've only ever seen his motion capture work in like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I thought he was great in that, and he's great in this too. But Felicity Jones really is the emotional core of the story, and what ultimately the whole story revolves around is her passing and the repercussions of that on all the characters, and how Connor and how Sigourney Weaver, who plays the grandmother, Felicity Jones's mum in this movie, how they all have to deal with it. And I thought Felicity Jones was great. Again, could easily see some kind of award recognition for her role in this. There's a moment in the film where, you know, Connor's sort of lashing out, he's destroying things, he doesn't know how to handle this situation, so he's lashing out, he's destroying things in the house. And there's a moment in the trailer where she says, you know, if this is the way you've got to deal with things, if the action of breaking things is helping you cope, then by God you break them. And the moments that she spends with Connor in this, they have such great chemistry between each other. You completely pick up on that mother-son relationship, and it's really touching to watch as the film progresses, and especially when you get to the ending. And I know that this is spoiler-free, but as I said, it's a movie where I think you can already guess what the ending is. It's truly heartbreaking, and she really brings that into a performance as well. I can talk about Sigourney Weaver in it, who was a very surprised cast member. I didn't realise she was in the film, and I think actually she gets top billing, which I think is a little unfair, because although she has a big part in the film, I really do think this is Lewis's, Felicity Jones's movie. I thought she was great in it. Now, I will say it's very strange to hear Sigourney Weaver speak with an English accent. It's something I don't believe I've ever heard before, or probably will ever since. And there were a few moments where her accent did slip, and it kind of took me out of the movie just a little bit. But Sigourney Weaver really does bring in the emotion with this as well. There's a scene in this movie where Lewis has destroyed a lot of things, and she's having to deal with ultimately becoming the guardian of this kid after her daughter passes on, and she's trying to deal with that. She has a very strained relationship with her grandson. The two really don't see eye to eye, and that plays in through the movie and the development of those two as well. It's a really, really great character piece, this, as well, in terms of how the entire family is affected, and growth and character development as the film goes on. That's a sign of a great screenplay and a great movie and great performances, and this absolutely captures that. So I loved Sigourney Weaver in this movie. There's a moment towards the end of the movie as well, which she shares with her grandson, which is another one of the most emotionally gut-punching moments of the entire film. I wanted to talk about Toby Kebbell as well. As I said, I've only seen his motion capture work. I thought he was great in the film. He plays the role of Lewis's father, who has long since divorced Felicity Jones's character, and he's moved to America, and he's got a new family over there now, and he comes over to England because ultimately he knows that Felicity Jones's time is numbered. And the relationship, again, between him and his dad, where his dad's trying to be there for him as much as he can, but he also has a new life and a new family in the US, and he says he doesn't have much money, so he really doesn't stick around. And as a character, you can kind of resent him for that, because you think that, it's his role, it's his job, he should be here, especially for Connor. And he very rarely is. They do share some great moments between each other. And actually, I wanted to save this for the spoiler section, but it's not really a spoiler. There's a moment that they share together when they're kind of boxing things up that Connor's destroyed. And I swear to God, if anyone's seen this movie and knows what I'm talking about, there's a line that Toby Kebbell delivers, but the audio doesn't look like it matches up with his lips, and it looks like they went in post and did it in ADR and changed the line or something, but I swear to God it doesn't match. I'm going to have to watch the movie again to make sure, but it felt very weird and took me out of the scene just a little bit. He's great, and let's get to Liam Neeson. So, Liam Neeson, who, oh God, this isn't a spoiler, who does, in some way, shape and form, also feature in this movie as himself, but mostly provides the voice of the monster, this tree creature, this tree demon, whatever it happens to be, conjured from Connor's imagination, is fantastic. And I mean, Liam Neeson's voice, if you've heard him on anything before, if you've heard him just in person, if you've heard him when he did War of the Worlds, or especially Aslan from the Chronicles of Narnia series, he's got a great voice. And, they've done a lot of digital manipulation on his voice to make it sound deeper and more hard-hitting and demonic, like a monster. But inherently, the warmth of that voice and what he is trying to instill in Connor carries through the movie. And this bond, this was integral that the filmmakers had to get right. You had to believe, although it's a digital character, you had to believe that this larger-than-life character was something there, was tangible, could be there. It's interacting with a live-action character, so you needed that dynamic to work between Lewis and the creature, and it absolutely does. And I mean, Liam Neeson's such a great actor. His voice just brings that power to it, and just the star power of him being in this film in some way, shape and form with his voice really works. And most of the film, in all honesty, is this pairing between Connor and the tree. And, in scenes that they're away from each other, you're focused on it and you're in it, but you always look forward to the next scene they share together. And the actual look of it as well, the concept is fantastic. This is what I'm saying. I'd love to read the book, because if these are what the illustrations are like, and having seen the movie now and how they've brought those to life visually, it's definitely a book that I'm going to pick up and check out, because I do love great illustrations, because I do love great artwork and illustrations, and that's paramount in this movie. And how they've brought it to life as well. There's entire scenes with this. I guess I can get onto the visual design of it now. There are entire sequences in this movie where it all looks like it's done with watercolour and with pencil, and it looks amazing. As a fan of animated films and animation in general, all kinds of animation, whether it be stop motion, CGI, 2D, traditional, whatever it happens to be, I always love to see great artwork and animation come to life on the screen, and it absolutely does in this movie. There's a lot of segments in the film where the monster is telling stories to Connor. It's almost like A Christmas Carol, where in that, Ebenezer Scrooge is haunted by 3 ghosts, which changes perception on things and help him change as a person. In this, the monster comes to Connor and tells him 3 stories, and demands that by the end, after he's told him the 3 stories, Connor will tell the monster a 4th. So we go into these stories and we live them through animation, the imagination in Connor's mind, but as we see them come to life on the big screen with the watercolour and the artwork and the digital effects, it really blurs the line between what is digital and what has been painted itself. And the sequences themselves, for any Harry Potter fans out there, really reminds me of that beautiful animated segment in Deathly Hallows Part 1, where Hermione Granger's reading the story of the 3 brothers. It's the same kind of animation and tone to it. And also, I mean, this film definitely does have some hard-hitting and violent segments in it as well, especially in the stories. And I love films like this because as a fan of, 80s films, back when PG meant something, right? Back in the days of, Gremlins, Never-Ending Story, Return to Oz, films like that, kids' films inherently, which had some very dark and at times scary moments in them. And those were always the films as a kid that I went back to, because I think a good kid's story, even in terms of a book, like if you pick up any Roald Dahl book, any great children's story has that element of danger to it. And this movie definitely has that in the stories, and I think that's what makes it powerful. And I actually think that this is an important film to show kids. The message is very hard-hitting, and I actually heard a kid behind me at the end of the film say, "Mummy, that was really sad." But it shows that they're getting something from the film, and they're understanding the message, and they're picking up on that. So I think it's a very, very important film in that regard. The themes of the film I'm going to talk much more about in the spoilers, but it brings in themes of reconciliation, of coping, of being able to move on, about finding that inner strength inside of you when all else seems lost, to move on from such a traumatic event and move on with your life and not become consumed by the grief. And the director and all the people behind it, you can tell they handle these themes with such tact and sensitivity, and it really evokes that emotion on screen throughout it all. And I'm getting choked up about just talking about it now. This film really, really did hit me. I need to talk about the music as well, because I'm a huge fan of film music in general. The music was done by, I hope I'm going to pronounce this right, Fernando Velázquez. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but the soundtrack itself, it's very understated in the movie. It very kind of is in the background, but when it hits in those emotional moments, it is beautiful. And when the end credits hit, and you get that chance to sit back and listen to the music on its own, away from the visuals, and you get to really isolate and pick up on it, it's absolutely beautiful. I'd recommend, if you're looking at the soundtrack for this, check out the end titles. They really do bring in all the best themes of the film and all the emotion of the film, so give that song a listen to. You'll definitely like it. It really does. It actually reminds me of Michael Giacchino's soundtrack from Lost, and I mean, this is going to sound a bit embarrassing now, but and a little bit pretentious too, but it's the truth. When this movie ended, and this is a sign of a good movie for me, it's movies like this that stay with you. And as soon as I came out the cinema, I was kind of in dumbfounded silence, threw my iPod on, and I put Moving On by Michael Giacchino, which is the very final season 6 finale song of Lost. Very similar style to the A Monster Calls soundtrack. And it was a very surreal experience walking around after the film. Like, I walked around for a good 30 minutes. And even now, doing this review now, talking to you guys, I'm still thinking about this movie, and I think it is definitely going to be a movie that stays with me. So if I'm going to talk about awards nomination, so as we know, we are coming up to Academy Awards season. I believe that's in like the first week of March. I need to check the dates on that, but already films are coming out that people are saying will definitely be up for some Oscars. You've got things like Manchester by the Sea, you've got Fences, Jackie, a whole bunch of films coming out that I will be seeing and I will be reviewing for awards season. I really, really hope that this gets a nomination. I do think it's good enough to get a Best Picture nomination. I definitely think it deserves some awards in there for Felicity Jones. I'd even give one to Lewis McDougall. In all honesty, I thought he was absolutely fantastic in this. If this film doesn't get nominated for Best Visual Effects, it's an absolute travesty, because what they did in this film was simply sublime. And if this movie doesn't get any recognition of any kind, it's one of the biggest travesties of the Oscars in recent memory, and one of the biggest snubs I can think of at the Oscars. I really do think it deserves some acknowledgement. So my overall opinion, before I get into spoilers, because I do want to talk about the spoilers in this film, this is one of the finest films I've seen all year. I know it's technically my first film of 2017, but this is still a 2016 movie, so I can't call it a 2017 movie. It's playing in theatres very soon, so please support this movie. Please go and see it. I will say it is one of those movies that is so hard-hitting and impactful that I'm not sure how many times I'm going to watch it. Now, that's not a slight against the movie. Many of my favourite movies ever made are ones I've only watched maybe once or twice, because they purely are so heavy-hitting, and you really have to go into them with the right mindset. For example, films like Requiem for a Dream, The Green Mile, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, they're all fantastic films that stay with you and have an impact on you, and you know they're among the greatest films ever made. But you really have to psych yourself up to watch them, and I think this is going to be the same. However, I do think this is going to become a classic in recent years. Everyone loved it at the cinema. It's getting great reviews so far. I think it's sitting at like a 90-something% on Rotten Tomatoes. It truly is a beautiful film, and it's one that everyone can connect with in some way, shape and form, whether you've had a family member or you know someone who's gone through the same kind of illness, or you're having to deal with the same things that Connor's character is in this movie. It really is kind of universal, and for that reason alone, and it's done in a way as well that's not manipulative, because so many movies come out like this where, I mean, I kind of liked the movie when I saw it, I'm not sure if I will now, but films like Marley and Me, for example, they're films there to just evoke that emotion in you. Like, clearly, like, you know, like a dog dies at the end, spoiler alert, you're gonna cry if you're an animal lover. But it feels very manipulative in its process slightly. Some people might disagree with me on that, but this movie felt very genuine. It felt incredibly genuine. It felt like that everyone involved, from the director to the producer to the cast, everyone was on board with it. Everyone gave it their all, and you absolutely see that in the movie. So I completely recommend this movie. I can't say its praises enough. I really, as I said at the start of my review, I wish that this had have come out in 2016, so I could have put it on my favourite films of the year list, because it definitely would have had a place on there. And the fact that it has stayed with me says everything it needs to about the film. So that's my spoiler-free section, so I'm going to get into the spoilers now, talk about a few of the themes and some of the elements that I wanted to bring up that I couldn't bring up in spoiler-free. So the first thing I wanted to talk about are the 3 stories that the monster tells Connor. Now, at some point, I mean, I'd love to do like a film analysis on this once it comes out on DVD and Blu-ray, because I've only seen the film once. It's a film I'm going to have to watch multiple times to truly deconstruct the meaning in everything. But this is what I've picked up on my initial view. So the first story that the monster tells Connor: there was a great king who was beloved by the people. His 3 sons were killed. I think it says one was killed by a giant, one was killed by a dragon, and I can't remember how the 3rd one was killed. All his sons were killed. The wife couldn't take the grief, so she killed herself, leaving the king alone. The only relative he had was his grandson, who grew up to be a great man, a respected prince among the kingdom. The king then gets married to a wicked woman who they call a witch, who is at first thought to poison the king and kill the prince's newfound love, which leads to a huge rebellion, with the prince taking back the kingdom and securing his rightful place on the throne. There's a great moment in the film where the monster explains the truth of the event and the truth behind the characters, and that the characters aren't as black and white as they seem in the initial telling of the story. He says that, you know, it's thought that the wicked witch was the one who killed the prince's wife, when it turns out that the prince was the one who actually killed his lover to secure the kingdom for himself, and to let all the people of the kingdom rebel and join against him to take back the kingdom, because, you know, the match was supported by everyone in the kingdom. But when he did get the kingdom, he was a great ruler. He was loved and he ruled for a long time. The witch was taken away. She didn't murder the king, like, he died of natural causes, he died of old age. So because she wasn't a murderer, the monster took her away and kept her safe. And Connor's very confused by this, and I think that a lot of kids would be confused watching the film for the first time who grew up with kid stories in general, because kid stories always do have a moral at the end, but there always is like a clear-cut hero and villain. And I love fairy tales. Like, you can see some fairy tales that go like deeper into the story, or do like a flip on it where the villain's actually the good guy. I love things like that, and that's kind of what Connor says. Like, he says, but who's the good guy? And the monster replies with, well, no one's really the bad guy. Everyone kind of has a touch of good and bad in them. It's like a very moral grey area. And this is confusing to Connor, and this is what's so great about the stories that the monster tells, because it helps Connor arrive at a new mindset and advances his mindset and makes him question situations differently, which ultimately prepare him for the loss of his mother. So I'm going to try and tie a theme to what I found in these stories. So the theme of the first story that I picked up on was blame, because ultimately Felicity Jones wants Connor to live with his grandma, played by Sigourney Weaver. Afterwards, the two don't get on, and he's saying, like, I wish she would go away, like, I don't want to live with her, I don't want to be there. It seems like he's blaming her, he's putting all his aggression onto her. And through this story, I guess that the witch character is the comparison to Sigourney Weaver's grandma character, and he wants her to be taken away. He thinks that she's inherently bad, whereas the tree's saying that she's not inherently bad, she's not inherently good, but there's a line there, and, you know, she deserves to go on living. The second story is about a parson whose 2 daughters become sick. He seeks the help of an apothecary who recently he's preached against, and in the light of the Industrial Revolution, the apothecary's work has gone out of business and no one respects him anymore as a healer. He goes to the apothecary to seek help, says that he will renounce everything he believes in, he will preach for the apothecary again, he'll reinstate his business, and as a result of that, the parson will go against everything he believes in. the apothecary chooses not to help him, and ultimately the Parsons' two daughters die. So again, another very bleak ending to the story. This is the one that brings in the concept of destruction, because the monster says that when the apothecary refused to help, he went there and he levelled the apothecary's home to the ground. And that whole destructive element and trashing your surroundings is a big part in the film when Connor ultimately snaps and he destroys the entire family home. There's a great moment where Sigourney Weaver comes in. There's a clock in the living room that has been part of the family for generations, and she says, you know, this has been the family clock. Forget all the clocks that you find on the internet or on your phone or whatever. This is the clock that we run by. This is a big part of our family. And he destroys it. He destroys the whole room. The transition from the story, where he's destroying things in the dreamlike world, the fantasy world, and when it fades out and he's in the living room and he's just... you see the entire destruction in the room. It's a very moving scene, and it's an understandable... like, Sigourney Weaver comes in and without saying anything, like, she sees the look of horror, frustration, but understanding on her face, and I think that's really the point of the film, where we get to see that change in her. And she does have a big change. All the characters in this movie, apart from one which I'll get onto in a minute, mostly have a change. The third story is a very, very brief one. It's not as involved as the other ones. It's right before Connor gets his revenge on the kids that are bullying him at school, and the monster says that there was an invisible man who didn't want to be invisible anymore. He wanted to make himself seen. So what did he do? He called for a monster. And that monster is the aggression, and this is when he gets his revenge and he lashes out physically to the kid who's been bullying him. Now, part of it may be the revenge on the actual kid, but a big part of it is just the sorrow that he's going through that manifests itself into this physical action. And we learn afterwards that he actually puts the bully in hospital, and we don't see the bully throughout the rest of the film. I would say that the weakest element of the film, in what is otherwise a great cast of very three-dimensional and believable characters, the bully character is very two-dimensional. He's the bully character you've seen in pretty much every other film. He really doesn't have any qualities to him or dimension in him. And there was a moment where I thought they were going to. I thought there was going to be a moment in the film where, you know, he approaches Connor, and I guess you could tie this into some of the other stories as well in terms of their themes, where we see this bully and we think we know everything about him, but maybe as a conversation with Connor and we learn that maybe the bully's gone through something similar in the past, or he's dealing with something at home that's out of his control, and bullying Connor is his way of letting out that frustration as Connor lets it out through destroying things and ultimately putting the bully in the hospital. I thought something like that would have been a really nice scene and would have given a little bit more depth to the bully. As such, he's very two-dimensional, and then he's out of the movie. It wasn't a big problem for me. I still like the film in general, but I did think that that was the weakest element, and I think maybe the film could have benefited with something like that, and it would have been a very nice scene of those two characters reaching an understanding. So this ultimately brings us on to the ending. So throughout the film, Connor's had premonitions of his mother's death. She's kind of hanging over a dark chasm, over a cliff, and he's trying to lift her up, but she keeps letting go. Like, he tries as he might to pull her back up, she always slips and falls down the hole. So this comes to the fourth story. So he learns that his mother hasn't got long to live, so he goes to the place where the tree is planted, the actual tree, before the Liam Neeson character bursts out of it. And this is the best piece of acting in the entire film, in my opinion, from Lewis, who breaks down. This is the moment where all of his emotions come to a head, and he's banging against the tree, he's punching it, he's saying, "Why didn't you save her?" The medicine, the treatment that she was on, the last resort treatment, came from a yew tree. And in the stories, the Liam Neeson character says that ingredients from the yew tree cure all diseases and cure all illness. And when it hasn't and the treatment's not working, he goes to the tree and he's blaming him. He says, "You lied to me. You were meant to save her. You were meant to heal her." And he says, "It's not her who I was meant to heal. It's you." And in that one line, that's the entire crux of the movie. The monster is there to help Connor cope and to ultimately let go of his mum. And we take that into a literal sense when we get to the fourth story, where that nightmare that he's been having comes to a reality. So he's trying to pull his mum up and she falls, she lets go, and then the tree demands that Connor tell him the truth. That's the only story he wants him to tell. He wants Connor to tell him the truth. And Connor says that I was the one who let her go. I let her drop down that chasm. And, you know, it's a literal sense, but it's also the sense that he's had to let go of his mum. Like, he's been trying to keep her alive all this time. He's been giving himself false hope, coming up with stories in his head like all this treatment's going to work, when deep down he knows that it isn't. And he goes to throw himself down the chasm as well, and he's falling down it, and the tree grabs him before he falls down. And it's kind of like the Luke Skywalker moment from Empire Strikes Back, when all hope is lost. He's just going to fall down that hole and just die. In this sense, it would be that he would give in to the grief and he would give up himself, and the tree is preventing him there from going, and says that it's going to be hard, but you've got to carry on. And this was that was the most emotionally impactful moment of the entire film. I mean, I was in floods of tears. Everyone else in the audience was. I could hear them. I could see them. And then... But this moment is integral, because when Connor finds it in him to let go and he comes to terms with the situation, we as an audience do too. So when he finally does go to Felicity Jones's bedside at the end and she's about to die, it's still very sad and you still get emotional and you still cry, but you don't cry as much as the scene before. And I thought that was just perfect, how that came together and how it evoked that emotion in the audience, or that slightly lessened emotion. Because even Connor there, although he cries at the end and he says like, "Mum, I don't want you to go," which is, it's just so heartbreaking, you're okay with it. Like Connor, you're okay with it, you've come to accept it. And I thought that was fantastic how they crafted that emotion. And then you think it ends there. It does fade to black. It kind of does suffer from the Return of the King syndrome a little bit. But like Return of the King, where I'm okay with all the multiple endings, I'm okay with the multiple ending here. So this is something that I picked up on. So him and Sigourney Weaver share a beautiful moment at the end where she's like, says that, "I know that you don't like me. I know that we're not fond of each other. But one thing that we have in common is your mum." And again, another beautiful scene. Completes their character journey. And something that's been teased throughout the entire film was there was this locked room, and Connor kept trying to peer inside, but he couldn't see what was in there. At the end of the movie, it's revealed that his grandma, Sigourney Weaver, has... At the end of the movie, it's shown that his grandma has been preparing a spare room for him and been getting it all ready and wanted to reveal it at the right time. So he goes in and he finds his mum's old sketchbook. And this is the sketchbook that... Because he's an artist himself, and we see old family footage where, even as a kid, like, she's showing him how to draw, and he's picked up on that talent that his mother had. He finds his mother's old sketchbook there, and all the drawings inside are of all the 3 stories that the tree told him, and of the tree itself, and of herself with the tree when she was a kid. Now, one really subtle thing that I picked up on, and it's not explicitly said at the end, but this is what I took away from it, and I'd love to hear what you guys think as well, so if you've seen the movie and picked up on this too, please do drop me a comment. At the beginning of the film, when she finds an old family film projector which plays the old 1930s King Kong, which was a great moment. I love that film. I love anything to do with like old-fashioned film or film history. So when they're watching that scene from King Kong, it was a great moment. And again, to tie it in with the stories, I'm thinking of so many things on the fly now. When you watch King Kong, you are sympathetic towards the Kong character because he ultimately hasn't done anything wrong. He's a creature out of his environment. He's kind of lashing out, and humans don't like what they don't understand, so they kill him. So even from a story perspective, it's a very tragic story, the story of King Kong. When you watch it, you are questioning the morals, like who is the good guy, who is the bad guy, like the stories that the tree tells Connor. So I thought that was fantastic. But there's a very blink and you'll miss it shot of an old family portrait with a little girl with Liam Neeson as himself in the family photograph. There's also a line that Felicity Jones says to Connor, saying that, "I really wish you could have met your grandfather. He was a great man." So when we get to the family book and we see the image of Felicity Jones with the tree, like when she was a girl, I picked up on it that Connor did meet his granddad, and the tree was the reincarnation of his granddad, because we saw Liam Neeson in that picture, and it shows that clearly in the sketchbook, Felicity Jones went through all exactly the same emotions that Connor went through when her dad died. Maybe he died in different circumstances, maybe he died in similar ones, we don't know. But we know that when he died, she would have gone through that loss as well, and she escaped to her fantasy world through her drawings, through her artistry, and that's ultimately how Connor dealt with it. And there's that look of realisation on his face, and it's not specifically said at the end of the movie that Liam Neeson's granddad character was the tree, but that's just what I inferred from it, and I think it's great that it leaves it open-ended like that. It's very subtle, and I like when it... because they could have explicitly said that at the end of the movie, and I'm so glad they didn't. But ultimately, Connor did meet his granddad. He picked up on all these stories that his granddad probably told Felicity Jones when she was young, and they've passed those stories down to each other. So it's a film about storytelling as well. Very similar to Kubo and the Two Strings, which, if you've seen my favourite films of 2016, was actually my #1 pick. And I think this would have probably been my #2. I think I would have had to have moved Star Wars back to #3. This would have been #2. Very similar themes in dealing with loss and using storytelling for that escapism to come to terms with and move on from the loss. So yeah, I guess that'll do it for my review. What made this particularly hard-hitting for me as well, and I don't want to go really personal in this, is that one of my friends actually is still going through a very similar element to the story of this film, and me as his friend, I'm also wrapped up in that situation too. So this film was kind of came at the right time for me, because I mean, I go to films for entertainment, sure, and escapism, and I love talking about films in general, but the best films are the ones that stay with you and that allow you to kind of get everything right in your mind, like the kind of character in this movie. So this film did exactly that, and I think that's why it's still having that impact on me now. But yeah, I just wanted to share that with you anyway. I mean, I don't want to get too personal with it, but that'll do it for my review on A Monster Calls. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let me know what you thought of this movie. Have you read the book? Are they similar? Please do let me know. In terms of what's coming up on the channel, as I said, Academy Award season is hitting. I've gone through all the recent films that are coming out at the Odeon Cinema, which is my local cinema. And oh boy, there are a lot in January and February. So I actually have another 2 films to see this week. I need to see Assassin's Creed, and I need to see Silence, which is the latest Scorsese movie. So I'll be at those sometimes this week, so expect reviews out for those throughout the week and all the way through the month of January too. There'll be more reaction videos from me as well, as and when trailers come out. But yeah, so that will do it for my review, and until the next one, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.